Hi everyone, RabbiYoniKatz back here with a reaction video. And I want to make this video because I think there's one point which needs some more fleshing out, some more explanation. And this is really the point that Chassidus comes to emphasize, and it cannot be overlooked. So I just came back from visiting the gravesite of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I'm feeling inspired. I'm going to highlight two clips, one of Rabbi Breitowitz, which we've seen before, and one from the conversation that we recently had with Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg and Rabbi Manis Friedman. So here it goes, and I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section. Any questions or any challenges, as usual. Here we go, Rabbi Breitowitz.
But the truth is, there is truth in what Rabbi Friedman is saying in the following idea. I mean, let's take the Derech Hashem that everybody knows, although it's not such an easy idea, right? Hashem created the world in order to bestow His goodness, right? Everyone in Or Sameach has learned that passage or that idea a million times, right? That's one of the most famous ideas that every Rebbe here has taught more than once, right? Hashem's desire is to bestow His goodness, and that is why He had to create a world where He could bestow His goodness. And if He would bestow His goodness without us struggling and earning it, it would be the bread of embarrassment, right? You know that? And that wouldn't be totally good. Therefore, Hashem had to create a struggle for us to go through, right, etc. Now, let's just take the Ramchal, which is actually not the Ramchal, it's from the Arizal, but the Ramchal articulates it. Isn't that saying that God needs to do something? God needs to be able to give of His goodness. So to make the statement that it's impossible to say God needs something seems to contradict the very aspect of the Ramchal. Now, I'll say this. God's needs are self-created, meaning to say God does not have an intrinsic need. God could have willed not to be made. So in a sense, God's wants becomes God's needs, as God willed to have this particular need. So it's not a contradiction to His omnipotence because He could have willed not to have, right? Like hunger. When I'm hungry,
So here he's making a very specific point that it's not an intrinsic need, meaning that He didn't have to have it. He could have willed otherwise, meaning that this whole creation and Torah and mitzvahs and everything that's going on here is optional to God. That this need for us and the need for us to do our mitzvahs is optional, because then it doesn't contradict His perfection, as he's about to say.
I have to eat. I can't will. I mean, maybe I could, knock myself out or something, but I can't will to take hunger away. So I'm kind of a slave to my need. God, in that sense, is not a slave to His need. God could will Himself in any type of situation. But I don't think it's false to say He has willed Himself to have certain needs, among which to be mative. So Rabbi Friedman's statement that God has needs is not as preposterous as you would assume. It actually is based on, well, he wouldn't say it's based on that, but it is connected to what the Derech Hashem says and the like.
So here's the big distinction. Could He have willed otherwise? Meaning, is His will intrinsic, essential, or not? So here, Rabbi Breitowitz seems to say that it's not intrinsic, and it could have been willed another way. So I want to sort of scoot over to this clip between Rabbi Manis Friedman and Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg about explaining the nature of God's will, His desire. Is it like our will, which is sometimes optional? We could desire this, could desire the other, or is God's will different? So I think this is a pivotal point in the conversation that Rabbi Manis and Rabbi Ephraim had. Here we go.
Because only Him means there was nothing that we can think of, because all of that was created. There was just Him.
Right. Which I don't know what that means, what that looks like.
You know what it's not.
Right.
So
we're starting Eino Mavada. There was just God. There was no world. There was nothing else but God. And obviously, this whole world was created. So what happened?
How did it go from just Him to all sorts of stuff?
Precious. Sarah
What-
Mamoros, never
What
alone.
happened?
He chose to create a world.
He chose.
Right.
Now that's a massive choice,
Yeah, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And since there was nothing else,
Right.
what is it he chose?
To create a world.
Meaning to create something that doesn't exist,
Right.
which means it wasn't the existence that attracted him, right?
Right.
He didn't say, oh, that world is nice.
Right.
There was no world.
Right.
So whatever motivated creation was just him,
Right.
without any input or, right? That means something from nothing.
Right.
If it was just him that had this rotzen, then the rotzen is him. Because there was nothing else. There was just him.
Which would imply that the Ratzon, the will, is intrinsic, meaning not optional, because there was just him. He has this desire. This desire is not motivated by anything besides him or outside of him or external, because there was nothing else. Meaning, like when I want to buy a house or something, by definition, there's me and the house, and it's almost like the house is motivating me or picking me to choose it. But if there was just me, there'd be nothing influencing me, nothing driving me, nothing, because there would be just me. So in the case of God, there's nothing that's forcing him or compelling him, because there was just him. So his ratzon, his desire, is him, meaning not optional. If he wants, it's coming from his essence.
So what do we know about the Eibishter? First thing is that before there was anything, he already wanted. So that want is just him, because there was nothing else.
Agree entirely, which is why Shalosh Shiras is a very big Indian for me. Ratzon Shabbat Raiva Deraivan, the moment before creation. Agreed. The difference is, I say, I don't know what it meant for him to exist before he created. He expressed some form of a Ratzon, but I don't know. I know what my Ratzon is, and I know he wants me to connect to it as Ratzon, but I can't know what that
But you
means
know
for
that
him
it
to have a
came
Ratzon.
from him,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
when there was nothing
Right,
else.
right.
So it's basically,
The ultimate act of benevolence.
no, benevolence to whom?
The ultimate to that which he was about to create.
Then creation motivated him.
Right. Motivated
not
by
Yesh
benevolence.
Huh?
Motivated by benevolence. I don't know why he's motivated. That's my boundary.
No, it's not a boundary, it's an insight.
It's not a boundary, it's an insight. If the idea of creation or world, or even the idea of benevolence, which is chesed, which was created on the first day of creation, didn't even exist, then he couldn't have been motivated by it, because it's part of creation. The idea of an emotion like love, fear, that's already talking creation. So this is a brilliant point, and therefore it's a great insight, like Rabbi Friedman saying, into God, meaning that this desire is coming purely from God's essence, coming from his essential will, not being motivated by anything else other than him, which just ups the ante and shows how vulnerable and how necessary it is. Because if it was coming, let's say, from his kindness, it would only go as far as that emotion of kindness. And kindness can change because it's an emotion. By definition, emotions change. So he's trying to point out such a desperation, such a vulnerability on God's part. If this yearning and desire is coming from his essence and not optional, doesn't that show how significant and how necessary and how important Torah mitzvahs to fulfill the desire is? It's even beyond infinite, because infinite is still limited.
There was nothing to motivate him
Right.
other than himself,
Right.
which means
He wants us here.
and that want is absolutely essential. That's him.
I don't think we need to finish the sentence with that. Where I'm more comfortable finishing that sentence is, there was nothing. He created something that filled a want or a need for him. How could he be omnipotent, infinite, and have a need or a want? I'm looking forward after 120 to understand what it means, Klape Shmaya, to have a want or a need. But I'm not going to sit here and try to explore and suggest and creatively understand Elokus's need and want. I've gotten as far as I think we can go. He knows that nothing existed before us, so he knows that we know that he created us to fulfill something. What he was fulfilling, because he's different than I can't know, and I'll find out when I get there.
We do know. We know that there was nothing but him.
Right.
So whatever he did was him.
Right.
It wasn't a shopping list.
Right.
So creating the world is him. Because there was nothing else.
Right.
The fact that it's him, he hides. That's called tzimtzum. So we know that whatever the Ratzon Hashem was or is not borrowed. It didn't come from outside of him. That would be apicursus.
Right.
It came from the internal essential him, when there was nothing else but him.
I stop at even using vocabulary about the essential him, because him is not the same word as him for me and you.
Right.
And essential is not the same word essential. There's nothing about him that's similar to us. He's the Ribbon Shalom, he's the Eibishter. So he gave us vocabulary that it's okay to use about him, but then there's other vocabulary.
You can't argue that. You can't argue not knowing.
The Rambam says we speak about Hashem in the negative based on our experience because we can't know what he is. So when we talk about knowing is essential, we can't know that.
Okay. So if you're arguing not knowing, then there's no point in conversation.
Okay.
Really, I mean, it's not a
right.
It's not an intelligent conversation.
No, it is. I think that there's, what I've been saying, there are limits to the conversation. So I agree, at some point there's no point to the conversation.
And we're already there.
Because when the Rambam says we can't describe God in the affirmative, only in the negative, what he's not. What does the Rambam mean?
I don't know.
You're comfortable exploring and climbing the ladder of describing him in the positive.
So wait a second. We describe Hashem as being all-knowing.
We describe him with what he gives us to describe him as.
Does he know?
Yeah.
Because
that's how he wants us to relate to him, as all-knowing.
And he wants us to relate to him as being essential, because there was nothing before him.
He wants us to relate to him as there being nothing before him.
Okay. So if there was nothing before him,
right,
then everything that comes from him is him.
Right.
So when you say Ratzon Hashem, you don't mean a Ratzon he acquired at some point in history. You're describing him.
Okay.
So one major point is human beings, when we need something, it's coming from a lacking, usually. And therefore, we need something to sort of provide for that lack. For example, I need to get from point A to point B, so I go buy a car. Now, do I intrinsically need that car? No, I have a lacking. I have an imperfection. I need to get from one point to the other. It's too far, and I can't do it without a car. So therefore, God is perfect, and he doesn't have lackings or handicaps like that. Meaning it's precisely because he's perfect that when he needs, it's not coming out of a place of lacking. He essentially needs whatever it is. So in the car example, I just need a car. And somebody would say, why? To get from point A to point B? No, I just need it. I can't explain it. Now, obviously, anytime you need a car, you really only need it to get from point A to point B. So as human beings, we can't relate to this idea really of essentially needing because our needs are always based on a lacking. But then it's not a true need because you don't need the thing itself. You only need the result that it provides for you. But with God, God doesn't need out of lacking. He truly needs, essentially needs, just the thing itself, not for what it provides. So this desire for Jews and Torah and mitzvahs, he desperately needs, not for some end game or as a means to end, he desperately needs it itself, which is hard for us to relate to as human beings. But that allows him, because he's perfect and he doesn't have any handicaps, therefore truly allows him to have a true need, which makes it that much more, because it's essential now. It's not just to provide something that he's missing. He really needs the thing itself. Like a husband who needs his wife, not for what she provides, but her herself. The need for oneness, not something from her, but someone, That's called the true essential need. And these are the little nuances which are obviously hard to articulate and verbalize and have to be repeated again and again. And hopefully I just did a good job. I'm doing this off the cuff, but hopefully if you got a little bit of the understanding of what I'm trying to say, it's another like drip of water on the rock. Thank you very much and hope you enjoyed.